What's up, everybody? It is I, James, coming to you once again from the Nerdy Mewzings Podcast studio. I am joined today by the brothers Dorian, Guy and Ian Dorian. It's my honor to have you guys here today. How are you doing today, gentlemen?
Doing great, man. It's a pleasure to be here, and I couldn't wait. When you asked for us to be on, I was like, oh man, because there's two things. One, I wanted to talk to you in person like this, because we've talked back and forth things online before, but not like this. And the other thing is, I don't think Ian and I have ever done an interview simultaneously. Like, we've had people come to us at conventions where they talk to me and then they talk to him.
Right.
But not on one cast. So I thought that was really interesting. I couldn't wait to, because my brother and I have, he has his things, I have my things, he's got his friends, I've got my friends. But every once in a while, we do like to collaborate and do things and stuff. So I thought it was a great idea from you. And also, I've never had someone who was also a martial artist, like a real martial artist, have me on a podcast who also loves comics, who also does comics and all. I thought that was pretty kind of cool. It's like, because back when we were kids, if you like were like, hey, I like comic books and all this stuff, to be like, really? I'm gonna kick your ass, you effing nerd. And it's shifted so much in the last 30, 35 years, where you could be a guy who's 6'5" like you and a world-class martial artist and still love comics. So,
yes, absolutely.
It's a great podcast to be on. So I know I speak for Ian and I to say that we are honored to be able to be on here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great, no pressure, first time with both of you guys on a podcast. I'm going to try to set the standard for everyone to come. Mr. Ian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I've been working on a lot of really great projects, and honestly, like Guy said, it's a real pleasure to be here. The truth is, we're big fans of you and what you do. We follow you. We admire the work that you do, the competition. You're world class, and it's a real honor to be a part of this sort of sharing, as it were, between the three of us. And to be with Guy is a real personality. He brings a lot to the conversations, and being a part of it with him and with you is really a pretty great opportunity here. So I'm really glad to be.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, and just, for the people who may not be watching the video version of the podcast, I think it's important to bring up that you guys are actually twins, and I'm not sure a lot of people realize that. So who's the eldest twin?
I am, and it's funny too you say that, because Ian and I have always been like, just like, we're very much alike, but we're complete opposite, and I would be like the cowboy, rough-looking guy, and Ian would be the scientist, academic, and all that. Not that he doesn't, it has nothing to do with the martial arts. It's just our look, what we look like. Ian looks like he's going boating. Ian looks like he should have a cappuccino with his finger up every morning, as he eats what he eats with mint and all that stuff. I'm like, give me the fucking coffee, but, and we're like that with our art too. I'm very systematic in things. And although we're both trained illustrators and studied together at the same time, studying when we were like just 9 years old, studying from the masters, the Renaissance masters and things like that. People think we were just, even though we like comics, that we studied from them, but we really studied these famous master Renaissance artists a lot. And Ian had his look and I had mine. And Ian's was always curvilinear. had structure and this beauty to it. Everything looked like a effing angel. And everything that I did was rectilinear and rough and squared and heavy and weighted. And you could see our personalities with our work, which you can today as well. There's always an angelic look from Ian's stuff. And Ian's Bernini, you know. And I would be more Michelangelo, even though Ian loves Michelangelo, because, you know, everybody in Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel has muscles. It doesn't need to look that way, even the women. But it was a systematic type of thing where Ian always has this absolute beauty in the line and curve of a form where even when he draws a rectilinear form, it has an organic curvilinear feel. So it's an amazing thing that those are the separations of us. But at the same time, we both loved martial arts. We both loved comic books. We both draw. We both sculpt. If Ian were to never study something in art, and I would never study something in art, but it's something that I studied and he didn't study, and something he studied and I didn't study, you could bet that either one of us could wind up doing the same thing almost exactly as well as the other. It's a weird thing about
That's amazing. Yeah. Ian, you want to expand on that a little bit? Counterpoint, Ian, counterpoint.
So first of all, Guy is the elder of the twin. We'll make that clear. Okay. He's 5 minutes older, but he's also taken that to heart that he is older, and he has done his very best to always be the older brother. I think personalities, as we are, twins tend to be very similar when they're very young, and then they start to show more and more of their differences as they age. And also, it's a looking glass self. We reference ourselves based on the way other people respond to us, or that's how we identify ourselves. And in this case, Guy and I, people would compare us a lot. And as a result of comparing us, which I think, to be honest, was not really, but it is human nature. But that almost helped, or I would say influenced our thrust to a more diverse behavior between each other. You know, he became more and more of the thing people thought him to be, and I in turn did a similar thing. That being said, Guy was always, we communicate differently. Guy communicates more physically, and I communicate more cognitively, I guess you could say. So, and then that has a lot to do with the interest that we had, you know, as children. I was always reading a lot, but unfortunately, it can be difficult for Guy, if that's okay for me to mention Guy. Guy, if it's okay, would you like to mention?
Yeah, it's fine. I'm dyslexic, so.
And a lot of people are.
And I have, you know, a lot of artists have attention deficit. I'm hyperactive, ADHD, and I have dyslexia. So it makes it really difficult because I just can't figure out a lot of the words sometimes right off, like as quick as you would assume for most people. And actually, Ian never really had that problem. And Ian was, when we were in like second and third grade, they tested me and thought that I had a learning disability. And it wasn't that at all. I just couldn't, and I couldn't focus. Yeah. And I couldn't, my mind was gone 2 seconds after somebody said something to the teacher. And I just, then I had to go and catch up and look and try to read, and I couldn't do it. So, but then it turned out it was weird. So Ian was actually sent to a gifted school, 2 years before me, Ian? I can't remember, a year or two?
If I may if I
And
can
then-
add to that guy.
Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
Okay, go ahead.
Take over.
Well, in all fairness, the guy, just to be clear, many studies have been done, and I'll go back to what Guy was saying. Many studies have been done throughout the decade, researching the intelligence of twins. And regardless of education, IQ, whether you follow IQ or not, IQ for twins tends to be the same, even if they were separated at birth and completely trained in different ways and educated differently. The IQ, the ability to, IQ is, for a lot of people, they think IQ is some kind of test about how many things you know. But IQ is more, oftentimes these IQ tests are more about how you learn. And the test is designed to see if you learn during the test and how you solve problems. There's a lot of problem solving. And that can be inherent without needing a quote unquote formal education. As a result, a guy, a child, going back to what Guy was saying, did not articulate himself the same way that I. And that is I believe the distinct reason, different, and the reason why I was chosen as opposed to him. But I do not believe in any way, shape, or form talent or aptitude or intelligence was in any way for that decision for me to go and not Guy. That being
Well, and
said,
I think a lot of,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I was going to say that I think the more that we're learning about all these things, a lot of creatives are diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, and all these sorts of things. And I think a lot of these things can actually be focused and used almost as a superpower. Certain areas of the brain are activating in a way that pushes us in a certain direction artistically, and we can actually sometimes excel in areas where your average person can't, due to these quote unquote, things that maybe were considered a disability.
If I
There's a
may,
difference
Ian,
in synaptic
James,
activity, right? Oh, go ahead.
Yep.
I was just going to say, my daughter just brought this up to me. My daughter's an adult, and so is my son at this point. And, my daughter said, there's different kinds of ADHD, Dad. There's hyper-focused ADHD. What it is with me is I can focus on what I am focusing on, but that means that everything else gets lost.
Yep. That's how my wife is.
I can't
It's
remember
also-
anything. Yeah, go ahead, Ian.
That also comes. Oh, thank you. That also comes along with time blindness. So, and it turns out that I haven't been formally evaluated, but based on my brother's evaluation, I went directly to look at all the formal questions and answer all the questions doctors use to evaluate if someone has ADHD or ADD. And it turns out that of the multiple questions, I answered every question with a positive. So I do believe that I am similar, but not the same. At the same time, I understand exactly what Guy means. Most of us, I would say that a lot of us are, the question, with Margaret Mead and anthropology in general, is one of the big questions is, are we what we do, or do we do what we are? And
Right.
just for a fun reference, that was also in what was that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie? 2 weeks. Anyway, where the one character
that's
said-
Total Recall.
Total
Total
Recall,
Recall.
yeah.
they actually addressed that issue. Are you what you do, or do you do what you are? And I would say for divergent people, we're starting to discover that divergence is not a disability. It's a different ability. And I think it's inappropriately or inaccurately termed deficit. And in particular, the last word, disorder. I think that is that changing that would make a profound difference in the way that people with this sense of thinking and synaptic activity would be treated. It's treated as an illness. And they are wrong. They are completely wrong, and I will not down on that. And there are times when hyper focus is absolutely necessary. To explain to someone who is not ADHD what hyper focus is like. If you've ever been in an accident and or your car spun out or something happened that was incredibly emotional or intense, you have a memory that you might recall this. It felt like it happened incredibly fast and simultaneously extremely slow.
Gotcha.
That kind of experience is similar to what I can express, I feel, as a divergent thinker, when we are creating images, artwork, we get into a place where time has changed. It has shifted. It completely exists and doesn't exist at all. And this is why we become blind to time, and yet we're so focused. It's different than focus. It's important to describe that it is hyper. It is a type of focus that is pinpointed, granular, like as if you were to use a microscope to look at things that are smaller than the naked eye. And based on the activity of different parts of the brain, allow people to be incredibly creative. Guy, for one, can't control it. It's something he just has to do. He's constantly creating characters. And this also is a result of dopamine. You know, as you're probably familiar, people who tend to have ADHD also are lacking dopamine. They need a dopamine response in order to be motivated. That's why if you take someone with ADHD and you put them in a situation that is impending, something that must be done immediately, whether it's something in terms of working on a drawing or a project, or something very, very life-threatening, they tend to become more focused at the moment of the impending situation, whereas other people
makes
become
total
more
sense.
nervous.
Actually,
Yeah,
if I
so you want those people in those situations.
that actually goes real quick. James and I were talking about martial arts, and I was saying that, you know, as far as being a martial artist, you know, if I'm not good at remembering the system 100% or a kata or a form, but in the moment, that's why I was always good with combat, because I had to go to combat because that was something that was right there, right now, happening at that moment. And I had to keep doing something new and not focusing on other crap. I just don't want all the other crap at the time. So it was the way that it fulfilled me martial arts wise. It's what fulfilled me was the combat, you know, and that's why I was always doing that. But just to harken back to what we were talking about before we went on air, you know, it just plays into that. And Ian, very good description of that stuff. Thank you, Dr. Ian.
Professor,
well, I want to get a little bit
Dr.
into Professor Ian. I want to get a little bit into. So we've talked like about your differences and everything like that, but I'm hearing a lot of similarities too. Obviously, you both ended up in very similar fields of art and have had a lot of creative projects. I would like to know, like, obviously, I'm guessing a lot of this started with a love of comics. Judging by your background, I'm sure comics were providing some sort of inspiration for getting into art. So could each of you kind of tell me, like, what was your first time that like a comic book really just struck you? And do you remember the comic or potentially the artist that you saw that really provided that creative spark and that inspiration?
I'm going to let Ian say this one first. Ian?
Okay.
Oh, okay. I was actually going to say, Guy, you go. So,
Okay, no, I'll go then. I'll go because I'm
yeah,
ready
go
to
ahead,
go.
guy.
I'm always
I'm
ready to go
too.
off my
But
seat.
please, you go first, bro.
Yeah. Okay, so I think actually, even though we both liked comics when we saw them, I think Ian, who was a lot of inspiration towards a lot of things first, because I didn't have the focus for it. And I was much more into physical things. I think Ian was literally the first one of the two of us who grabbed the comic off a rack. Like the spinner that you have that I do not own.
Amazon. Get on Amazon. You can get them on there.
And so I think our first comic was a Trevor Von Eden book. I'm not sure if that's right. An X-Men Trevor Von Eden. And Ian, I'll let Ian talk about this because my memory is not good. Ian's much better with memory.
All right, Guy. So Guy's right, and to some degree, but there's a slight adjustment. So, first of all, Guy and I were art was made available to us very early on in our lives, whether it was from comics or not. That's one thing. Number two, I don't remember being the first one of us to pick up a comic, but if Guy says so, I'll go with him. But I don't think that's as relevant. I think that though it may be in some way, but I think the most important thing is that the Trevor Von Eden book guest starred. It was Power Man and Iron Fist guest starring in the X-Men.
No, that's what it was.
However, that was not actually our first comic book. It was the first one that Guy and I bought on our own with our own money.
Okay, that's why I remember it.
Gotcha.
Some of the first books that we got, the first books we read, we did not buy. Guy, you may remember this, you may recall this, and not on the head or a thumbs up might make, then you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe the first comics we actually experienced were when we would get our haircut. And we were on an avenue called Elmora Avenue, and our aunt took us to get our haircut. I think we were maybe 6 or 7. And on the desk where at the time, men and boys
the guy
would
had
wait,
comics on the table.
the one guy had comic book on the table. And the one comic book, I believe, was an Avengers comic book. I believe it had a George Perez cover. And it was Jack Kirby interiors. It was a 70s book. It was a new title. I'm not sure of which character was the enemy.
Okay,
I believe it was a large
you're
yellow
talking about
character.
with Ultron.
Well, the Ultron was Perez. That's right. But this was something different. This was
Right, he
actually
did the
earlier
cover,
time.
but the interior I think was Jack. I'm not sure if it was Jack. It might have been.
Guy, you're probably thinking of the
who knows?
Title that we got about a year later.
I don't know. A bunch of comic guys are gonna write in about this. It must have been this one. It couldn't have been that one. I don't know.
It's okay. If I had the image, we can even.
Can I
find the
just
image
make
and maybe add it?
But let's get back to like what got us into that was we had an aunt and an uncle we were very poor. Okay, I mean like dirt ass poor. Okay, the welfare thing and all that, standing on the line, getting cheese, getting gifts given to us at Christmas because we had no money. Food pantry. Buy the oldest food, dented cans, all that. Yes.
Back then,
no real
dented
sneakers,
cans for us to eat.
no name brand anything. All our clothes didn't fit us. Our sneakers were glued on heels at Pathmark from Pathmark bin, and if we were lucky. And we had an aunt and an uncle who our father and mother got divorced when we were 1. And we were with a single mom who had raising 5 children. Our brother was already older. She had raised 6, but we were the 5 left, and she was doing it on her own, monetarily and everything, which was obviously not possible, So my aunt used to pick us up. She was very kind to us. She had no children. She would take Ian and I out, all of us, for the weekend, get us McDonald's, and take us to go to the store to get us like a toy. And to us, that was like all of our other friends at school. You know, they had the toys, they had the clothes, they had this, and we had nothing. And so she wanted to normalize our worlds as much as she could when she saw us on the weekend. So big praise to her right now. Her name is Trudy.
Aunt Trudy.
Anyway,
Aunt Trudy
yeah.
Holding.
So
As a matter of fact, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say that's where we even got the money in the first place to buy the first comic books. But she took us out to go, and we would see comic books. She was the one who took us to get our haircut. She was the one who took us to the auction houses that sold comic books and comic shops there. And that's how we got our martial arts equipment. Tons. Ian recently found pictures of us at like 11 years old, where we wanted to find something from the past. And the furthest back we could go with those photos to have us at 11 years old at the Kung Fu shop, and you could see all these. It had Japanese throwing stars, not Kung Fu, nunchucks, and everything like that at the shop. And it was like,
that's amazing.
Oh my gosh, he found the photos. Yeah. But anyway, that's how we really got into being able to purchase comic books and get into comics. Now, I'm going to let Ian take it after this one thing. We were drawn to the same comics, but we were drawn to different comics in as far as art was concerned. So for me, it was Sal Buscema, Walter Simonson, Jack Kirby.
Some
Herb
guy
Trimpe.
named Kirby.
Yeah, Kirby. Now,
As
I'm not
was
saying
on my
Ian
shirt.
wasn't. I'm not saying Ian wasn't drawn to Kirby, because we both were. But Ian saw Bill Sienkiewicz. He saw Neil Adams. And
Oh,
yeah,
there you go, Ian.
so he saw all that. And that's where, so you now know how we got into starting comics. And now you know how we started splitting our thought processes with comics. So it was with comics and art. As well, Ian, me having the problem with reading, I never read through a full comic, but I was super interested in drawing them. And Ian read every comic and was super interested in drawing them. Then he went the Neil Adams way, and I went Simonson, Kirby, John Byrne way.
That's interesting. You point that out, because in your styles, I'm looking at both of your work. I could see Ian. I can see the Neil Adams influence in your work, and then Guy, absolutely the influences you just said. I can see them heavily in your work as well.
Byrne and Michael Golden and stuff like that. Yeah. Ian,
Guy loves Byrne, Golden. I love Michael Golden personally. Wonderful. And Walter is a wonderful person too. We both love Kirby. There's no doubt about that. We're both huge fans of Kirby, because you must recognize what he's done. Just amazing. And that being said, I gravitated toward Neil Adams, Barry Windsor Smith, John Buscema, and Sienkiewicz, early Bill, especially on I remember I was blown away. I couldn't even understand the completely very different approach that was being used by Bill on the New Mutant. Looking at the pages, they look so distinctly different from other comic pages. And if I'm a comic artist of the time, and as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure they did not want him to stay on the title, because it was so divergent from the typical styles.
But I heard, not to cut you off, Ian, but I heard a story that Bill, I don't know, we could just ask Bill next time we talk to him, but I heard a story that Bill actually asked, can he do what he wanted? And they said,
I was
okay.
told that the story I got was that he was in the office of Marvel with Frank Miller, and this was his chance to do whatever he wanted, whether it was going to sink or swim with the editors or anyone else. It was Bill's chance to be Bill, because when Bill entered, it was due to his new association or a while back association he had established with Neil Adams over on West 45th in Manhattan. Because from what I understand, he brought in his work to Neil's studio, and Neil brought everyone into the room and said, "Look at this. This is what you all should be striving for."
Well, Bill is a god.
From my understanding, Bill was then called an editor was called by Neil to give this guy a job. I mean, Neil did the same thing for Frank Miller. As a matter of fact, the first time I met Neil Adams, I was brought there. I was assisting a guy named Lou Small Jr., who was working on Ms. Mystic for Neil Adams. And he brought me to meet Neil, and I wasn't ready to work for Neil, but Neil said, "I'm not going to, tell you not to come back. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you homework." And he told me this story about Bill, and he told me about this guy named Frank. But he didn't tell me at first. He said, this guy, he kept coming to me, he showed me his work. I told him, he didn't fit in with my stuff, but keep going. And then, the guy showed some promise and call. He went over to Marvel. He got on a pretty good book, and now Frank Miller's doing great. And
A pretty good book.
he said, and this is why I'm not going to tell you to leave. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you whatever I can help you out. And I was so embarrassed, almost I get embarrassed with people that I admire of that magnitude to ask them for their drawings. So I still kind of get that way, but I certainly did then. And Neil would draw over my drawing to show me how I could learn to draw better. Initially, I was doing panels where I would draw the picture in the panel. And Neil said, no, it's the opposite. Draw the whole figures and the environment, and then block it any way you want, whether it's vertical, diagonal, horizontal. And he was actually teaching me and preparing me for what I ended up doing much, much later in life, which is storyboarding.
Right.
He was teaching me to think like the camera, the view of the scene, and to realize the scene. He actually expressed to me that if you draw the figure and then frame it, draw the figure in the space and then frame it, even if of course, these would be very loose drawings.
Gestures.
But if you draw the figure beyond the frame and then frame it, if the character is taking a step or moving, then your shoulders, your body leans forward and back and in different positions to manage the environment. And then when you crop it, really makes the figure look like they're alive. It's something I learned from you. I never forgot.
That's
And
really cool. I haven't heard that. That's something new to me. So that's really cool to think of it that way.
Well, I applied that thinking. I don't know where Neil learned it, whether it was from experience or seeing other artists or reading something. It could have been a combination of all three. But as Guy had mentioned, I'm more Bernini. Bernini, the Baroque sculptor. And during the Baroque era, they emphasized the diagonal over the horizontal vertical, and instead of symmetry, they focused on what's referred to as asymmetry. So, in that sense, the thing about I taught at one point. Guy mentioned we both sculpt. I taught graduate sculpture, clay modeling from the model, but what I would do is I would do busts and have my students learn to think of the bust as a living thing caught in a moment, time, with a mindset for an action. So I was trying to understand what makes Baroque sculpture different from Jack Kirby's art and comic book artists like Winsor Smith, Buscema, and many of these other great illustrators and sculptors. What makes them so different is that they imbue the drawing with the inner thoughts or the quote unquote deep character, as opposed to drawing character. You look for the character's behavior, response, and experience in the drawing, and then the drawing becomes almost like the secondary that you're trying to, in order to express.
That makes
moment.
sense. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like
And
to
I
talk
learned that.
about.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd just like to talk about Jack a little bit more because, we talked about this other process and kind of how Neil approached things and was teaching you about, drawing the scene out, not worrying about the panels. And then you have that over there. And then you have Jack, who would start up in one corner with like a toe or a finger in work. And he had this whole thing in his head that he would just construct seemingly out of thin air because he could see it in his brain so well. Do you guys, do either of you understand how he was able to do that? In the follow-up question, just so we kind of have some in the bank here for the follow-up question, did either of you ever get to meet Jack? So you can answer those in reverse order or, however you'd like. But
I'll start because I know some things about that. So first of all, unless we ask Jack himself, we just know what people say. But from what I've heard, I actually, just so you know, I did lectures on Jack. I started a group, a Jack Kirby group with Eric Larson.
Nice.
A good long time ago, and I think it's at 25,000 members or something like that at this point. And I have another group, a Kirby group, that has like 7,000 or something like that. But I even did a podcast. I was asked by Jack Kirby's son Neil and Jillian Kirby, his granddaughter, to be with them as a guest on a big podcast in New York City.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. But the way as an illustrator myself for 30 plus years and everything, and knowing about Jack, I think the thought process for Jack was that the story was already there in his head, right? Mostly. Or he could create it on the fly and it would be just as great as anything if he sat down for 10 weeks to write it. But he saw the story alive in his head first. He created it all. But when he went to the paper, I believe the reason why he was able to do that is he knew comics, he knew storytelling, and he used 6-panel grids, 9-panel grids, 3-page panel grids, 5-panel. He had a system that he almost created, right? And so he would go, okay, this is how it's going to happen. That's going to happen. That's going to happen. This is going to be 3 panels. This is going to be 5 panels. I'm going to open up on a splash page, go to double page splash, which you could see in a lot of his work, especially looking at his DC work. Splash page, double page splash. Already knew that. Intro to the character, intro to the story, show the title, chapter 1, blah, blah, blah. Then double page splash and wow the fuck out of you. And then he would go into the storytelling and he would have grids set up, right? A system. And he knew if it's more a preconceived notion of how the panel was going to be composed, how the page was going to be composed for the section of story he wanted to do, not about the drawing. The drawings were part of the process to tell the story. But setting up the story in the page is the panels first. It's very important to know that lots of times too. There's going to be 5 panels or a 6-panel. Okay, let's go with a 6-panel grid. Boom, you already know the answer. 6-panel grid. Don't worry about that now. Now you're going to talk about the flow of the page. So the page is going to go backwards S. So backwards S. Or was an S, so backwards, whatever. So it flows up and follows around that S, right? And then he already knows the system. There's going to be shadow here. He's going to use foreground, middle ground, and background, which Kirby was a master at. And he was going to start off with a headshot, and then he's going to move. So he knows already all the panels, the system, blah, blah, blah. So it was all that stuff, all that process was already in his head before he ever touched the paper. Jack could look at the paper and see a page. He knew what shot. He knew he was going to open up on a perspective, a 2-point perspective or a 3-point perspective. He knew he was going to do a close-up at this one talking, or a 2-shot, or a medium shot, and then move to an extreme close-up. He knew that first. So in his mind, he already knew he could. All right, it's an extreme close, the eyes. Boom, just. Now, he didn't have to gesture because he knew how to can draw so well. And people, one thing I want to say about this is people don't realize how much knowledge you have to be able to draw that stuff in the way and as fast as he did. When people, Kirby created a system. He was telling his story and getting it done, and it was shorthand. But Jack knew all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Innately. So then, before I give it to Ian, I'll finish up with, so now I brought you to where the thought process was. He already saw the entire page on the paper. He knew the shots already. So Jack could then go, start here, and then go here, and then go there, because I already knew what the grid was, what was in that panel, what was in this panel, what shot was in this panel, which shot was in that panel, and you start blocking the form out, drawing it in. I did see that there are some instances where you could see very little instances, but some instances where you could see a little sketching. But for the most part, that son of a bitch drew 4 effing pages a day with no break on detail, beautiful forms and structures that were shorthand, and even in the early days, there was less shorthand, but you could see it starting to happen even with Simon, but the answer to the question about him drawing from the beginning right onto the paper, that answers the question of how it occurred and how he thought of it. So it was already there on his paper, and he drew it.
If only it were that easy. If only it were that easy. He made it seem very easy. Ian, you want to expand on that?
Sure. I'll try to address some of the things that Guy mentioned, and just I'm going to go to the practicality of the application. Right after I reference something as a segue from what Guy has just said, Jack, I may paraphrase, so I might not get it exactly right. Jack said, I saw that story first. I knew those characters first. I lived that world. Jack was there before it hit the page often. And once he got started, the world unraveled so his drawings followed. That being said, I would say that he drew with his mind, and his hand followed more like a seismograph following an earthquake. So to keep that in mind, we have to understand, though it is a mechanical application, it is a psychological that is the impetus for it and the trajectory. That being said, I'll go to the incredibly basic practical application. One of the number one things a person learns in any art school, though Jack only spent a very short amount of time in school in New York before he left, and then went to animation, and then also left almost immediately from animation. I believe it was a Fleischer studio. There was a very basic thing you would learn in school, and that is that when you draw, if you're a right-handed person, you start at the top left and you work down to the bottom right. The reason why is your hand doesn't rub across and never touches the paper, the previous drawing. And it may have been, Jack was a very simple and direct person. He did not overthink or overdo anything. I mean, there was elaborate things, but that was while he was in his hyper-focused mode. That being said, I would think that his application was merely a practical one. Apart from that, Jack, we have to keep in mind that Jack had drawn thousands of books for probably over 20 years before he ever created the Fantastic Four, or the X-Men, or any of them.
Almost
He had
30.
already done a full life career. So he had become much more succinct and adept at expressing his idea. That doesn't happen because you're solely a genius. Genius is a result of intellect, application, hard work, and repetition. And Jack was all of those. He drew in so much so that he had enough time to develop a form. We all know, as all of us having done martial arts, the practice is not the same as the application by any means. At times it is within a controlled environment, but outside of a controlled environment, anything goes. The same happened with Jack, in my humble opinion. That being said, I would say that Jack needed to get a lot of pages done, but he had some things in mind. Going back to our early discussion about the emotion and the experience of the moment, Jack was drawing and living in that moment. So the reason why we have such tremendous dynamism in his work is because he was trying to be as succinct while being as direct and energetic as possible. The jagged straight lines are emphasizing the stress. Like if you look at a Michelangelo sculpture, you'll see some of the forearm and the finger is out. You'll see some of the extensor muscles being activated to show what's happening. But Jack would use a simplified, if you would, shorthand version of it, which most people misunderstood as poor understanding of anatomy, but actually it was the most succinct, abstract, and direct expression of the act of the body. And
Can I
Jack
just say something real quick on that,
please,
Ian?
Guy.
There are planes of structure on the body. There are peaks and valleys in the human body. When the muscles overlap each other and cast shadow, many times you will see sort of a triangular form, and the triangular form comes from a large mass and then a smooth surface as it smooths out. So it creates this triangular form, whether it's a curvilinear triangular form or a rectilinear triangle form. And what Jack would do is he would do this, and then he would do that thin to thick, and then a squiggle, and then a thick to thin. And he would connecting how the muscles connect from here and then go there. And sometimes he would make some loops, and that was sinew and tension within the muscle. And so he created that, and that's what that was. But he realized that if it was more rectilinear, he could use that also as a systematic way of creating forms for metal, and other things. But that's just a more expansive understanding of what that stroke was, and that Ian's explaining. Go ahead, Ian.
Well, in what you're saying, I think it's important to point out that a lot of people don't realize, because a lot of people, when they think of Kirby, they think of what you just described in that type of style. But if you look at his work from the 40s, like anybody that wants to crap on, oh, he doesn't know how to draw, you look at his figures and faces, they're as good as any proper anatomy drawing today in his old work. And then he changed his style.
One quick way you could say this, and then I'll let you guys continue, is if you look at a 6/8 face, I don't know if you know what that is, a 6/8, but it's...
No, what is that?
So you have a straight on, 1 to 1, you have 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So quarter view, right. 3/4 view is usually like this, so 3/4.
Yeah.
So 6/8 or such is from the back of the head.
Okay, gotcha.
So now, to draw that correctly, on a whim, and I'm going to go whoop, because it was it sort of gives you an idea. A lot of creators don't do that. And there's an artist, I'm not saying anything bad about it, and I'm not saying who it is, but there's an artist who's really famous who can barely draw that.
It's a very complicated
when
angle to draw.
When they draw that face, and they always draw side view. But the body's like this, and the ears.
Right.
But the face, if you cut off the face, the back of the skull of the cranium from the ear back, that the face is a side view. But they get away with it looking,
when they
right,
do it
Ian?
wrong. Yes, when they do it in act.
Yeah. And so, so this doesn't mean that artist is bad. It's just that drawing those complicated things. Jack Kirby drew any part of the body anytime he wanted to, and although he had his system, he could draw anything at any time in any position. A woman doing this, and it was right. And a man with this, or a hat, or if a person had gloves on, it's like the Jack Ham. If you've never heard of Jack Ham, guys, look him up. But he knew all the wrinkles. 1, 2, 3, 4, but the wrinkles were all right on the suit. The drapery would be correct on the pants and how they fit on the human form and moved. The shoes, the movement, a tie. These were things that he drew at an alarmingly fast rate, like a cartoonist would draw, who's drawn Scooby-Doo 600,000 times. He drew figures and forms that way, and that fast, and 4 pages a day, going from either 3 panels to 9-panel grids.
It's monumental. Monumental achievement.
It's absolute. Ian, I don't know if Ian wanted to expand or you wanted to go to another question.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish answering his question. He posed a 2-part question. One was about the style and technique of Jack Kirby, if I recall correctly, and it might have been a 3-part question.
Yep.
But then there was another part about the last part was about whether either of us had ever met Jack, and luckily I did.
Oh yeah, that's right. Ian did.
Yep.
But before I get to that, I just want to say,
dang it! For those of you just listening, Guy is shaking his fist at Ian because he's jealous that Ian met Jack.
So there were a couple of things I want to say. I was a professor for probably over 25 years for drawing and painting and sculpture and drawing. So as a result, and I've taught at many different types of schools, and the only reason why I mentioned that, not to boast my credentials, but to say that I've spent a lot of time thinking about these things. And one of the things that I can tell you, people confuse. People say, could Jack draw? First of all, drawing accurate anatomy does not imply that you can draw better than someone else. Drawing is not encompassed by emulation of what you observe. As a matter of fact, the most profound artists are the ones who bring about and explain that which cannot be observed. Jack Kirby approached art in that manner. As a matter of fact, if it weren't for those people who approach art in that manner, we would all draw exactly alike. We would all just emulate one another, and human beings would not like that. There was a time period
So we would
in
be
sculpture.
AI.
There's a time period in sculpture where they had fully developed the techniques and understanding how to model and sculpt a figure accurately. That lasted about 90 years or so until we hit with the Hellenistic period, where now we started seeing figures abstracted again. 9 heads high, missing parts of their muscles would be simplified or expressed and over-exaggerated. Exaggeration didn't just come in comic books. We can start from the beginning era to the ending era of any individual artist in comic or in fine art and we'll see the same sense of the process of meticulous detail to a more expressive, simplified yet direct form. We see it in Michelangelo's sculptures. We see it in Titian's painting. We see it in Peter Paul Rubens' painting. We see it in the drawings of Kathy Colwyn, and we see it in Jack Kirby. And we can see it in virtually every artist that we come across because it's the artist's process. So to say, could Jack Kirby draw? If a person does not consider that drawing encapsulates far more than simply emulating something accurately, then they're probably not prepared for my answer. So I would urge them to consider what that really means. And I don't mean it condescendingly. It's more of an invitation to explore what it means to draw. Frank Miller is one of my favorite artists, though he may not be everyone's. His simplicity and directness, my brother, in the power and force that he tries to put in, the weight and volume, those were key elements in the core essentials of drawing. So it's not about whether someone looks realistic or not. Realism is the stepping off point. As a matter of fact, Plato said that you should not trust an artist because they give you a version of a real thing. It's referred to as the realm of form. And in this realm of form,
Right.
The true thing, the true form exists in an ephemeral world. And in our world, say he used the analogy of bed that the carpenter constructs. He will not make the perfect bed, but he will make his version. And then an artist, if they were to draw the bed, would maybe not understand the construction of it, but do a version of a version. It's like a copy of a copy. So therefore, do not trust art. However, there was another artist, another philosopher who happens to have a similar name, Plotinus. And Plotinus said, no, you're wrong, Plato, okay? It's the opposite. Artists don't draw what the reality of it. They reveal the reality we cannot observe. And that is the premise for how, even up until this 21st century, we luckily have latched onto that sensibility. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to have people like Picasso or Jack Kirby. They wouldn't be around. They wouldn't exist. Delaunay or any of the others, whether it be fine art, quote unquote, or illustration. And I would say that the same logic stands to reason in every form of visual communication or audio, music. Whilst other people focus on the beat, without rest, there's no music, there's no rhythm or heart
Absolutely.
to work with. So it goes a lot deeper, and I urge people to really go a lot deeper.
And what he's talking about is why there were different times in art and different movements in art and different, there was
Absolutely.
Fauvism, there was abstract art, and even artists like Picasso had his own periods with blue period and such like that. And Ian could elaborate on some of that. But Jack Kirby didn't see it any differently. He didn't see what comic artists do as anything different.
Yeah.
It was our own movement.
Right.
It's our own movement in our own way, in our and that's why there's so much diversity in the look of artists, yet we're all still doing the same thing. So
it's imperative to note, if you don't mind me interjecting.
No, please,
for a second,
Ian.
Guy, that the
Ian's
visual
much more
image
articulate than I am.
No, you did a great job, Guy. I love you. It's imperative to reference the value both in movie posters of the 50s and 60s and 40s, which were probably the height of movie posters. Some in the 70s as well. But for me, the 50s, 60s were just tremendous.
A lot of the painted posters.
And in comic books, is that and popular culture art, I'll say, is the use of the word and the written word and the font or letter with in conjunction with and synergistically working together with an image. This is something that has become incredibly distinctive within the world of comic book. And it's not new, but it was done in an original way as a result of this industry emerging in the way.
That
So I
was
would
very,
urge you.
very, very well said, Ian.
So I would urge
You're
people-
making me think a lot. I love this stuff. I am
Well,
going
it's
to be
just-
doing a lot of research afterwards.
If I may, Jack Kirby's work was taken and used in what is considered one of the first pieces of what is
Pop
it?
art.
What is it called?
Pop art, guys.
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
Susan. Pop art.
Yeah,
Also,
there's a
this is
romance
this is where
novel
guys like
image.
right. This is where guys like Lichtenstein, who borrowed comic book artist work. Now it's a big uproar.
Joe Cuban's
Finally,
work was used.
they're making millions off of panels
Well,
of
some of
just
Just
Magneto
to make a comment
and
on that, to make a comment on that guy, some of that artwork was actually deemed appropriated illegally.
absolutely.
Some
Yeah.
of the recent review of the work. But if I might say, if you don't mind, I would like to answer the question about Jack meeting Jack.
Oh yeah, briefly.
Now,
Briefly, let's get
Real
to
quick,
you meeting
right
Jack.
before you say that,
Yeah.
I want to just talk about Jack Kirby. One thing about that one inference where we see fine art in Jack Kirby's work. Okay,
Yeah, please
past
go for it.
comics.
Yeah.
Ghost in the Machine is sort of his Guernica. Ian, I don't know. Ian, you probably know the right way to say Guernica. I'm probably saying it very Americanized. But I
It's
know
okay,
there's
guys.
Jornica
Guernica
or
was,
whatever. Yeah.
It was during the Franco-Prussian
Painting
War,
of a
and
war.
Picasso made a black
Yeah.
and white painting, a very large.
So
black
if you
and white
ever saw
painting.
that, so Jack
the
Kirby's
war.
Ghost in the Machine, if anyone's ever seen it, it's this long painting, and there's all this mechanical stuff, and a figure a head of sort of a robotic head in there and everything. But that was Jack expressing his fine art at that time. And there's a lot more inferences of it, but let's go to what Ian talks about. Ian got to meet Jack Kirby. Let's hear about Ian's meeting with Jack Kirby.
Make us jealous here, Ian.
Well, the thing is, I met Jack Kirby and Bill Sienkiewicz on the same day.
Oh man, you're making us feel even worse now.
When I met Jack, after I met, Bill did a review of a few sample pages that Guy and I had done, which were pretty horrendous, but nonetheless,
But
we were
but not as
very
bad
good
as you
at-
would think either.
Well, yes, sure. There was hope in the pages. But to cut to the chase, I met Bill. Bill was incredibly gracious to me. He spent a good amount of time reviewing my work, and I've known him ever since. So it has to be close to 37 years or 35 years or so. That being said, I then went straight, I beeline for Jack Kirby and Roz, and I spent pretty much the remainder of the day with Jack. Not only that, I went behind the desk.
Why, I oughta.
Jack invited me
You're
to go
shaking
around
our
the
fist.
table.
Yeah.
Yeah, after about a half an hour or so hour, Jack said, we're talking too much across the table. Why don't you come around the table? And I stood and sat with Jack and Roz for pretty much the remainder of the day, with the exception of about an hour and a half where Jack went to do a panel with Frank, I think, and a few other people. Paul Levitz might have been part of that panel. In any event, Jack taught me a few very important elements of storytelling. And at the time, I didn't exactly understand what he was referencing. And then years later, I ended up as an instructor of advanced figure drawing and color and composition and several other classes at the Joe Kubert School where I taught. I'm very proud of that time because several of my students, they were all pretty darn great students. several of them have become directors in animation, members of storyboarding for feature films. Matter of fact, one of my closest dear friends, who I love very much, Bill Thompson, along with a dear friend, Aaron Thode, created a company, and they have been the ones keeping me working when I'm at work.
Oh, that's awesome.
And,
there you go.
Shout out to them.
Awesome.
Story department.
Story department. Nice.
You can find them online. They work on all the blockbuster films. And Bill and I were very close when he was a student. He was a painter, and I taught him everything I knew, and I encouraged him to go out to painters who had maybe more had developed their skills even to a greater skill level, and study with them. But we stayed very close, and many years later, he found himself being asked to do storyboards. And years later, I moved out to LA, and he said, "Hey, you wanna join our team and do storyboard?" And I worked on several non-union production commercials and some stuff for video games. That being said, I ended up joining the local 839, and I became a character designer on the Watchmen 3D animated film that's coming out.
Oh, very cool.
This year. As a matter of fact, as a result, I was getting some messages from Dave Gibbon, and I didn't actually believe it was Dave. He owns the full rights. I believe Alan Moore gave his rights over to Dave. And we were very, very concerned. Jonathan, my boss, or my art director, was very concerned about really doing the best we can to emulate and match Dave's look as well as possible, even to the point of developing brushes and tools that would really give that authentic look. And I was the only comic book artist who was brought on to the team. And I think that I was kind of the unicorn in that sense. But it was a good push and pull for me to learn more about animation and character design for animation, and for me to sort of throw out my sensibility for comic and Dave's work. But Dave was sending me messages and I wasn't answering them. I didn't think it was really him. And a friend of ours, Guy and I, called up and said, "You're not, did you speak with Dave?" I didn't think it was really Dave. Then I realized, oh my goodness, it's really Dave. I thought it was a joke. I thought somebody was pranking you. Well, Dave and I have been sending messages back and forth for about 9 months now. I really love it. We get along very well. He told me, he used a word that made me feel very proud of the work that we all did there. He said that the work that we did, he's had a chance to see the work that we did for the animated, maybe a series of films. But he used the word glorious.
Oh, that's high praise.
The only reason why I mention this is because Jack Kirby went to be an animator and working character, and then went to comic book. And I went the other way, coincidentally. And that brings me back to meeting Jack. And when I got to meet Jack, the thing was, I was nervous. As I told you, I always get nervous in front of people I admire so much. But Jack made me feel very at ease very quickly. What was interesting was Jack wants to express himself. He wanted to express himself so much that he would stand up on his toes to get even closer to me when he spoke, especially when he got it.
Yeah.
And he would always do that thing where he sort of smiles. There's a big smile right after he makes a comment. But he taught me a few things that were very important. He said, Ian, I may not always get the anatomy right. I may not always draw the perspective accurately, but I'm going for an idea, a concept, a world. And he said, when you create the rules for that world and you set the tone for that world for your readers in the beginning, they will go with you anywhere and they'll follow you anywhere. And I repeated that to Joe Kubert. Joe and I would have lunch every Wednesday when I was teaching there. And I was there, I think, Mondays and Wednesdays. And on Mondays, I would go into Joe's studio after teaching and spend about an hour with Joe pretty much every week. And with Adam taught me a lot. Adam Kubert, we got along very well. Really did whatever he could to help me improve my own skills with regards to storytelling, sequential storytelling matter. And Joe was just a brilliant. Joe was a kind, stern, soft.
Yeah, truly
person.
one of the greats too. Like, doesn't get enough accolades in my opinion.
I
Yeah.
would say
But
that my Jeff.
Go ahead.
I don't want to. I don't want to cut you short, but I want to make sure there's a couple other things I want to touch on
Sure,
before
let's do it.
we finish up. Because I know guys got a hot date tonight. It's date night, so I want to make sure
Date
that
night
we.
with the
Hey,
date night with
it's
the wife.
important, man.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Very important.
So what I wanted to give both of you a chance to, so this will be kind of another two-parter, I would say. So first big moment of breaking in each of your careers as far as getting professional work. And then to kind of finish things up before we go, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about what you have going on right now and where everybody can take a look at that and show their support for you guys. So, Guy, you wanna talk about when you first broke in?
Sure. So, I'm gonna jump to where I first broke in. Ian
Yeah.
was the impetus again here. Ian met someone by doing a drawing for them, and they said, "Hey, I know someone who is just starting out as a professional comic book artist with, I think he was already at Marvel, just starting out, I'm not sure. And he lives in the city." Well, if you want to be like Jack or Sal Buscema or these guys, you go to the city, you work in the city. And this was a real Marvel guy. This is a real artist. Oh my gosh, that thought process alone is like the breakthrough right there. Ian happened to know this person from where he was working, who was a truck driver or something. And it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate, but he gave Ian this number. Ian went up to see the guy. The guy's name was Mark Pacella. And he was working at Marvel and on some things for Zelda or something like that. Friends with Dan Penosian, friends with a few other big guys. I think he knew Ron Garney and stuff.
Ron's a good friend of mine. That's awesome.
Yeah, I like Ron too. Ron and I sat
awesome
next to each other. It was Larry Hama, me, Ron, and Jason Alexander. Really great setup there for a con.
A lot of people don't know that Ron's actually a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well.
Oh yeah, he's a badass.
Yeah,
that whole row with Larry, me, and him was like, I don't think anyone should screw with us.
Nobody should mess with you guys.
But anyway, so Ian was the academic. Ian was off to go get his degree. He had a goal in mind. I had one goal: become a comic book artist. I was young. I'm a goal-oriented guy. If I started, it's gonna happen. If I say I'm gonna be on TV, I'm gonna be on TV. I've been on TV. If I say I'm gonna go and become a boxer, I become a boxer. If I say I'm gonna wind up at the Shaolin Temple someday, my fucking ass was in the Shaolin Temple training. If I say, that's one thing about me, because I can't not do it. I get so angry if I can't do it. Ian was that help. Ian just happened to have this connection, and Ian decided to go off to college and do what he said he was going to do, get that master's degree. Me, my focus at a young age, I was still only 19 when I first met the guy. Ian moved off, went over to college, and I went to do that. Ian brought me up there to meet him. I became his assistant. What jobs is he working on? X-Force. Right as Rob was leaving, he was taking over for Rob on X-Force. They're like, "Can you draw?" He didn't draw like Rob. They asked him to draw like Rob.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So I was his assistant. No credit. I loved Mark, but fucking Mark could have gave me some fucking credit. I'm going to say it for
Mark
the first
Costello,
time.
to be clear.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm saying it for the first time. I love the guy, but come on, man. You could have put my fucking name in the guy.
He did
Sorry.
recognize
yeah,
you.
yeah.
He did recognize
But he
you
did a lot
later
for me.
on
He did
Image
recognize me
Comics.
later on. But
And by
at the
name.
time, what a lot of people don't know is I was sitting there assisting on those early books, like number 11 of New Mutants, I think it was, or whatever it was, or X-Force. I'm sorry, X-Force number
X-Force,
11,
yeah.
and even before that. So I got a chance, because of how everything worked out, that I got the chance to be an assistant at a young age, and that was my breakthrough, because I was sitting there. But you get a breakthrough, right? But you have to work your effing ass off after that. Like, so there's nepotism and stuff. I hear people talk about nepotism as far as like, oh, this person in Hollywood, their family knew this person, that's why they're famous now. But there's something a little different. You always find out that they had 3 other brothers and a sister that never made it. Why is that?
Yeah.
Well, because family talents, you're part of who your family was. You're part of who your father was, your mother was. Not just the people that they knew, but the talents that they have. And if you had an artist as a father, or this, or a musician, chances are you might be one of the ones who can do the music or can do the art as well. You just might get that chance, other than, oh man. So Ian wound up getting this fucking break that just came out of nowhere. And I was able to get that opportunity, but I took full advantage of that opportunity. Ian was a huge supporter of me, got me my first art table, got me supplies I needed. Whatever he could do to help me in my endeavor while he was at college, he did.
That's amazing.
And I did not sit there and squander it. I traveled into the city with no money, and my wife was very kind. While we were young kids, they had no money, and I had a child at a young age, because I literally wanted to be a dad at a young age. I had it all planned out when I was a child. Literally as a child, I wanted to have 2 kids, start young so I wouldn't be an old dad. I wanted to talk to my kids, very different than my life was. I didn't want them to not be poor as anything. Anyway, so I took that advantage. I broke into it by being an assistant and doing not only being an assistant on multiple X-Force books and X Factor and all this other stuff that no one even knew about. There's drawing stuff in there. But it broke me into Marvel. And then I got to show my work. Dan Panosian brought me up there to actually have an interview. Mark brought me up there to be as his assistant, to be hanging at the office. Dan brought me up to meet Ralph Macchio and show him my work, which was absolutely unbelievably horrible. I was just I didn't know what to do with myself. It was bad stuff. But after that, and Ralph goes, "You got about 2 years, kid." But while I was there, I got to meet everyone at the offices. For 2 years, I was a fly on the wall at Marvel. You cannot do this today.
No.
I saw all of that. I met John Buscema. I knew John Romita. I Fabian Nicieza, Bob, editor Bob
Harris. Bob
Harris.
Yeah.
And before that, Tom DeFalco
Bobby
and all
Chase.
these people. Yeah, but yeah, all these people were just a normal thing to me at that point. But I wasn't broken in as a professional, my own professional yet. But everyone knew me. An amazing thing to begin with. And they still had the bullpen and all that jazz. Like, everyone was traditional. But I busted my ass. I did 150 pages of samples going up to Marvel. Even as they knew me, they would go, nah, sucks. No, get out of here. Blah, blah. 2.5 years of painstaking F-offs,
Rejection.
basically. rejection.
But, well,
So it wasn't
in all
like
fairness,
just because
they
I
were
got not everyone, but some of
Not
those people who
everyone.
weren't. I'm not gonna lie. Some of them were
Yeah.
pretty much not nice, and those people are no longer with the company for a while. But they were
Yeah.
most people were great, and so getting in the door was super important. Staying in the door is a fight. It's a fist fight, and I mean it, because it beats you up in a mental way that you just don't understand until you do it. You have to have a skin that's so thick, because you're coming out every time you walk out of that office, you're getting beat up, and you have to say, "Thank you for your time. I'll be here next week. Thank you for your time." And then you have to go home and spend 70 hours a week while you have a child, while you're hoping to get work, while you have no money. We had no money. We had no hot water. We took care of our child. Anything past that, if we didn't have hot water, we didn't have hot water. But I needed money to go to the city. And I couldn't eat. I had no money to buy lunch while I was there. So it was all this hard stuff, and rejection and everything. 150 pages after that, doing tons of books and tons of assistant work, up in New York City till 3 a.m, walking outside to go get a reference for Deadpool's knife from a knife shop somewhere off at some street I've never heard of, with a hand-drawn map by Mark, with drug dealers asking me for money, and gangs outside. And then I would go back to his place and I would draw Deadpool's knives. Case in point, issue 11 of X Factor, or X Force. Anyway, but that was what I had to do after Ian helped me out. Then I had to bust my balls, and then finally, 2.5 years later, I got my first job, paid. Before that, I was paid. The Daredevil story that was never to be published. It was, and then I sold. But my first 2 inkers on stuff that wasn't being published was Al Milgram on a Fantastic Four double page splash that they bought, and Dan Panosian on a Daredevil splash.
Nice.
And then after that, it was all that. But that's how I broke in.
Hey everyone, sorry to jump in here and leave you on a cliffhanger. This is the longest episode of the Nerdy Mewzings podcast to date. As such, I am splitting it into 2 parts. So we're leaving you hanging here after hearing how Guy broke into the comics industry. We will return with part 2 in a few days and pick up with where Ian broke into the comic book industry. So make sure you tune back in and hear more amazing stories. Guy has a crazy story about a day that is just unbelievable with all the encounters he had. So take care, be nerdy, and we'll see you back here for part 2 in a few days.